Hey guys, hope you are having a great morning. Today we finally get to wrap everything we have talked about, concluding this small series. Today we are actually going to talk about what the billion-dollar bet is. Everything has been leading up to this. In case you missed them, I will link the first 2 videos of this topic down in a pinned comment below. Once again, I want to thank the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists for their amazing work in interviewing and journalistic publishings which inspired me to make this video. The never-resting eye of Wall Street looms every waking hour, never forfeiting a second without scouring for new opportunities to turn your world into hell for the sake of a profit, no matter how small it is. Before we start, let me quickly state that I am not a financial advisor, and that all content discussed in this channel is simply information gathered that I deem important for people to know, so that they can make informed decisions. All efforts are aimed to better understand the nature of the current market in anticipation of the greatest squeeze in financial history. Let's get started. So yesterday we left off talking about the poor sad excuses that head of real estate Dana Hamilton was making for Pradium Partners' sickening behavior. She elaborated some weird pretense that attempts to make it appear that renting and getting a mortgage for a house are somehow the same thing. This could not be any more wrong for reasons already explained. A key thing I made note of was how Dana Hamilton started praising Pradium Chief Mullen, which leads right to where we are going to start today's segment. She started going off about how great he is for anticipating the needs of all the waves of millennials who don't have the means to buy a house, and how he positioned himself to help them out of his kind heart. So, picking up on that, the Pandora papers actually have a leaked pitch made by Mullen that was intended for investors of the company. The plan lays out how they would be forcing people out of home ownership. According to this pitch, they laid out a plan on how they intend to make big returns while minimizing taxes by buying discounted houses in the wake of the foreclosure crisis. The plan was to first buy discounted priced houses, which would allow investors to enjoy healthy returns on investments from the booming rental market, and then, once house prices rise enough and there is clear indication that they can't artificially pump their values anymore, they would then start selling at the peak for huge profits. Both the Post and the ICIJ did some deep research and indeed corroborated that the company and investors alike saw great gains from their bets on renters across the different regions where they operate. All the way back in 2013, a firm that was controlled by Bhargava's Singapore Trust had agreed to invest in Pradium. The once online gambling executives trust would eventually contribute $6.6 million. By September of 2018, the overall value of the investment had increased to $9.4 million according to the account statements that were leaked in the Pandora papers. Bhargava said the investment achieved a 10.35% internal rate of return by the time the trust exited the venture in 2019. This is about the same average annual return in stocks as measured by the S&P 500. An expert went over Pradium's fund offering documents, and found out that the company was using a series of complex legal arrangements that would allow it to keep the profits from being taxable in the United States. The way they went about it was they allowed money from foreign investors flow into a partnership in the Cayman Islands, where they wouldn't trigger the need to file tax returns. The Cayman Islands partnership would then later send the money to a domestically controlled entity in Delaware, which would allow investors to avoid having to pay the taxes that are typically imposed on foreigners who profit from a sale in the United States real estate. This Delaware company then started investing the money they made into real estate investment trusts, which, funny enough, do not have to pay taxes on earnings from rental income either. They served as the legal owners of the rental houses that they managed. Pradium Partners was actually asked by journalists at the ICIJ to give some explanation as to how they are arranging their tax scheme, and they replied with a PR statement that said their investment vehicles are structured and managed in a way that is in accordance with the best practices in the industry. In another statement that was made by Bhargava to the ICIJ and the Post, he said that he complied with the relevant tax laws to the full extent, saying the trustees that manage his family trust chose Pradium as their selected investment source and that he has had no access to the proceeds. He would explain how unaware he was of the taxes Pradium may have paid or dodged in the United States, and then talked about how in Britain, which is the country where he resides, there is not requirement to pay taxes on income outside the territory. In Singapore, where Bhargava's Pradium investment was held, there are also no taxes on profits from the sale of investments. Back to Mullen, the legal arrangements that he made also granted a certain level of tax benefits too. As is the standard practice of private equity ventures, Progress was designed in a way where they have to return to its executives a share of the profits out of proportion to their original investment, which in this case was around $25 million. This is where things get really interesting. The ICIJ and the Post made attempts to uncover how much Mullen made from the fund, but they were not able to find an exact amount, at least through the leaked documents in the Pandora papers. This is because his income depends on the level of returns that investors get, as was explained during the investment pitch. Say that the venture managed to achieve 17.5%, which is about half of the projected return on investment. This would mean that the takeaway for Mullen and the rest of the fund managers would be well above $1 billion. This figure comes from an analysis done by assistant professor at Michigan University, who carefully reviewed the documents. If other investors saw returns that were similar to Bhargava's 10%, these Pretium managers would see earnings totaling around $230 million, which is absolutely insane. What is even crazier than the sum of the profits these clowns are generating is that the outsized share of these profits is that these profits are the compensation for the managing of the fund, but it is not considered taxable as regular income is. Instead, these profits are taxed under a much lower capital gains rate known as carried interest. Carried interest is very controversial for obvious reasons, and analysts at the Congressional Budget Office have provided evidence that it deprives the United States Treasury of more than $1 billion a year in lost tax collection. The fact this is even debatable is a testament to how wrong the interests of this nation are placed. Several former employees of Progress Residential have come out, and many have given testimony validating that the company does indeed treat its tenants unfairly and wrong. On interviews, some would talk about how terrible they felt working for a company that treated their residents so poorly. They gave some examples, like how Progress Residential would actually force tenants to pay for home repairs even when the damage should have been covered by the company according to the policy. These former employees would talk about how they handled clients, saying that the guidebook was to essentially apologize for the inconvenience, but if the tenant doesn't render funds to fix the problem themselves, they would be automatically evicted from the property. It was incredibly brutal and black and white. Some of the former employees said they switched jobs doing the same thing, but that this is somehow becoming standard practice across the companies in the sector, and many have just outright switched careers. Progress Residential was actually told about some of these interviews, and they said that they reject the unfounded assertion, calling it completely false and grossly misleading. The numbers of former employees talking about all the things they were forced to do that punished tenants is just too big to ignore, however. Another example comes from 4 former employees who said Progress Residential would often refuse to relinquish security deposits, even when tenants left houses in good shape. Once again, when Progress Residential was asked about this, they refused the claims. Progress Residential has a sizable policy to punish tenants through an array of fees and penalties that are in the provisions of the leases that tenants sign. Some of these fees are insane, and even the word insane is a major understatement. Check this out: on Tammy Sue Lane, the neighborhood we talked about earlier, tenants are required to pay 10% of the rent if the payment is more than 5 days late. They charge $7.95 for a firm that is selected by Progress Residential to come collect utility payments, $9.95 a month for failing to buy renter's insurance, and a $35 convenience fee each time the rent is paid with a credit card. If Progress Residential has to send out a maintenance crew to make some repairs, tenants will be slapped with a mandatory $75 fee. If Progress Residential files an eviction case, the company will also slam a $200 eviction administration fee. You literally get nickel and dimed for anything Progress Residential has to do. I'm surprised they didn't have administrative fees for flushing the toilet too. Lindsay Siegel, the director of housing advocacy at Atlanta Legal Aid Society, said that the standard lease that firms use across the entire country are about as punitive as they have seen from larger private equity landlords, and that their sole intention is to generate massive amounts of income without providing any value. Smaller landlords, who have fewer resources and tighter bottom lines, don't even come close to imposing these large fees. And this is where this story actually becomes even sadder. As we all know, the pandemic we have been experiencing has been devastating for people. The complaints left by tenants of Progress Residential were not really heard until September of 2020, when the pandemic was doing serious damage. As you all know, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention issued an order protecting tenants across the country from evictions if they provided a signed statement from their landlord affirming that they could not pay the rent. During the moratorium, Pretium Partners continued to evict tenants, which opened congressional inquiries. Pretium Partners filed to evict 1,200 of its renters during the first half of this year 2021, but once congressional reviews began, they sharply curbed the practice. Guys, there are interviews of people, aged over 50 years old, who are diagnosed with cancers or other serious disabilities, who Progress Residential sought to evict during the CDC moratorium last year. A couple gave a pretty sad and insightful interview about their experience through this. At first, Progress Residential told them they would work with them to help them out during these uncertain times, but then surprised them with an eviction notice. They were even dragged to court, where the judge had a separate date for here since there were several Progress Residential tenants there in the courtroom as well fighting this injustice. The judge ordered the family to be evicted, and soon a deputy sheriff came knocking on the door randomly, warning them that if they didn't leave voluntarily, they would be forced out. Guys, these couple I am talking about also have lung cancer and spinal ailments. After trying to see what her options were, this family came across information about the eviction moratorium, and they filed CDC paperwork with Progress Residential, who never told her about this clause. After filing, they also sent an email to Progress Residential pleading and begging them not to evict them, as they were doing the best they could under the circumstances. Still, because Progress Residential was quiet about it all, the family ended up leaving in order to avoid further problems. But here is the kicker of all. Progress Residential then acknowledged the CDC paperwork, dropped the case but never actually told them that they had cancelled the eviction order. They kept that quiet to get them to leave voluntarily out of the assumption they were being forced out. Progress Residential is now demanding them to pay back $28,000 back in rent and fees. In the interview, they talked about how they were treated like scum by Progress Residential, being forced out the way they were, and now being hit with all types of fees and missed rent payments after all they have done. Progress Residential has to be one of the worst companies in the world, and I mean that as an objective and as literal as I can. This company does not deserve to have customers, it deserves to be buried underground. I am appalled that we have reached this level of corporate dystopia in this country, where people get treated so wrong. It is so out of touch that it often feels like it isn't real. Many of you ask me in the comments, but what can we do about it? I'll tell you what you can do. You can share this news with people, you can bring the topic up for discussion and give it the attention it needs. You don't need to do anything special, unless you want to of course, in order to make significant change. Bring awareness to these things. Share this video with your friends or talk about it with your family. I have said it a million times, being quiet is no longer a suitable option for us to fight back. We need to open our mouths and exercise our First Amendment. These companies shouldn't rule the world like they do, and we can stop it only if united we face them. You can write to your congressman too. Do anything but just simply lay back watching it all unfold waiting for a savior to rescue us. Let me know if you like the video. I will try to stitch all 3 videos into one and release it tomorrow. I want to thank all the folk that showed up and watched this little 3-episodic series. I hope to have ingrained in you some knowledge and hopefully help grow a wrinkle in that smooth brain of yours. Like I said, I will link the 2 previous videos on a pinned comment so that in the chance you missed it, you can watch it there. If you want to support this channel, I have a Patreon link in the description as well as some one-time donation links for Cash App and PayPal. Thank you again for being a part of this channel. I will continue striving for better content. Hope you keep having a great day and I hope to see you later today on the recap video. Until then, keep on buying the dip into the moon.